Do you feel like everything is your fault? Anytime somebody gets upset or hurt, it's your fault. Anytime something bad happens, you blame yourself. And so does everybody else. Do you feel like no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how little or a lot control you have over it, it somehow falls back on you? Well, this is a condition that a lot of people have these days where they're falling prey to irrational self-blame and irrational guilt. So there's a situation, let's say a friend of yours, gets in a car accident, and they were driving to your house because you invited them to your party. And now you're blaming yourself, thinking it's my fault that they got into a car accident. If only I had not invited them to my party, none of this would have happened. This is a extreme example of how irrational self-blame can be, how irrational guilt can be. And we've all been there to some level or another. But if you're experiencing that right now, I want you to know it's not your fault. It really, really isn't. And we're going to break down all the ways that you can identify when you're doing this in irrational ways and how to break free of it so that you're not constantly blaming yourself, judging yourself, feeling guilty all the time. And in general, it's going to help you feel more happy. You're going to have more energy. And overall, life is just going to be way better when you break this habit of irrational self-blame.
Yeah, a lot of self-blame is based on some patterns that happened in your childhood, whether it's you absorbed that energy and saw the pattern manifest through your mom or through your father or somebody close to you, or it was kind of the opposite, that you were beaten down, or it was beaten down is the wrong term, but it was instilled in you that you were the fault of something. This happens all the time in chronically stressful houses. This happens all the time in houses with a lot of conflict, or it can happen in abusive relationships. Unfortunately, it's a very common thing that if you have somebody who is a blamer, that you then absorb and become the blamee. And so that's where this pattern can come from a lot in your formative years, even all the way through your mid-20s. If you're in a relationship like that, or you're around somebody who does that is one of your primary kind of attachment figures.
And it can even be a form of coping where, let's say that your parents are arguing all the time. And as a kid, you've got two choices. You can either believe that you have no control over how they're doing, or that it's your fault. So in that moment, it can actually feel somehow better or safer to think, as a small kid, you're thinking, well, if I'm just a better kid, then they won't argue as much. So that feeling of false control is somehow more comforting than just feeling totally out of control. And in that moment, it might serve you. But later in life, you start to use this too much, where anytime people that you love are upset, you think, oh, it must be my fault. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes people are just upset. In fact, oftentimes it doesn't actually have to do with you. If somebody calls you and they're in a bad mood, that's a lot of their own issues, a lot of their own things that might be projected onto you or just kind of thrown your way, even though you've done nothing wrong.
Right, and there's really two ways that self-blame manifests in people. Number one is kind of a leadership mentality, which is I take on the responsibility, like I kind of have control of my team or my association or my company. And so the self-blame then will trigger some kind of empowerment or some kind of call to action. The other side of it, and I think the side we're focusing on more today, is the self-blame that puts you in a depression, the self-blame that shuts you down, the self-blame that, comes from those chronic situations that we talked about and can be really, really destructive and detrimental to your mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because taking responsibility for your life is extremely helpful. That's a very, very empowering, beautiful thing to do, to say, the situation that I'm in, I'm the one that's going to be able to respond to it and make some changes and do what I need to do. I mean, the fact that you're watching a video like this means that you're on some level taking responsibility for your situation and wanting to improve it. But as you said, that's so different from the irrational self-blame, where you're just giving way too hard of an estimate on how you're doing, or taking blame for the behavior of other people when it's really not your fault that they did something or said something terrible. Going back to that first example of a car accident. It's like, it's not your fault that they got into a car accident just because they were going to see your party. What's the alternative there, that you don't invite them? It makes no sense when you really start to break it down. And I know in that extreme example, it might be obvious, but where it gets tricky is those day-to-day small interactions where it's like, well, maybe you did make a small mistake, and now because of it, you're blaming yourself tremendously. So an example of this might be, let's say that going back to that first example, you tell your friend to come over to your place for the party, and you give them maybe just some bad directions. And so they take a road that they weren't supposed to take. So now you're really blaming yourself. You're like, well, not only did I invite them to the party, but I gave them wrong directions. And if I had only given them the right directions, then they would have, lived. That small mistake that I made caused some big result to happen. And if only I had been perfect and not made that small mistake, then this bigger thing would have happened. So this is another common form of self-blame, where you're projecting this small mistake to be the actual cause of something that is totally unrelated. An example of this, another example might be with the coronavirus going on. I remember when I was at the very beginning, like around March or April, my parents got sick with it. And I was totally blaming myself, thinking, oh, I gave it to them. What if they die because of me? And it's like, is it really my fault that happened? If for anyone that's listening, if you or if a loved one has passed away, and maybe part of you is thinking you gave it to them or somebody, it's like that small mistake of forgetting to wash your hands one time, or hugging your mom when maybe you shouldn't have, or whatever that small mistake was, to then project it out as the cause of the negative result that may have followed is a bit much. It's just an irrational leap of self-blame.
Yeah, it's not rooted in an objective reality. It's we talk about the stories that our parts tell us all the time, and so a way to start coping with it in a different way is to just ask yourself, what am I scared of if it wasn't my fault? Why am I so attached to pointing this towards me? And doing some journal writing, meditation, doing some processing of like, what is this part of me that reflects everything back into me scared of if it were just something that happened? Is there a fear there? Does it feel like things are out of control? Does it feel like the world's just big, wild, and scary? Does it feel like there's no rhyme or reason and things happen randomly? These can be foundational beliefs that may be really sweeping this control that this part of you wants to have or thinks that it has, and it can be really scary. So asking yourself again, what am I scared would happen, or asking that part of you, what are you scared would happen if we didn't blame this on me, is a good place to start, and to start to really gets more into the bottom with some curiosity and compassion of, why is this happening? Why do I have this thought pattern?
Yeah. And also, are you falling prey to just taking on other people's perspective? Let's say that you have 100 people in your life, and one of those people are blaming you for something. Is it fair to say that just taking their perspective 100% is a bit much? Don't you think that it's okay to be like, well, I know that so-and-so thinks I made a mistake, and I know that so-and-so thinks that I'm not a good person, but is that true? So what if so-and-so thinks that? That doesn't make it true. That just means that they think that. There's so many different cases of people where just having that one negative, toxic person in your life can really mess you up, because you believe them. You take on their perspective as your own, and there's like no part of you that will stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
This is a big part of the problem, is there's no defender inside to say like, hey, wait a minute, actually it's not your fault. This situation is more complex than just you. There's a ton of factors. Going back to the car situation, like, we don't know what that person was. Maybe they weren't paying attention to the road. Maybe they were texting. Maybe there was a drunk driver on the road. Don't you think it's at least as much that person's fault as it is your own. So looking at all the factors there is super important.
Yeah, and a lot of what this self-blame can be rooted in is just a lack of or a mismanagement of sensitivity, a lack of a management of empathy, and then a real big lack of boundaries as far as everything's just kind of coming in and absorbed as truth. And so, like Ennis was saying, there's no filter, there's no defender, there's no questioner, there's no information seeker that can be there to get the facts. It just automatically goes to a really sensitive part of you that absorbs it, and then probably manifests into some kind of guilt or self-shame or depression, and causes you to go down. So starting to challenge those thoughts, or at least just starting by, let me get all the information first. Let me see if there's more information, so that you can start to break the habit that's automatically happening. Right
Exactly. It's you start to pause and say, wait a minute, before I blame myself entirely, is there anything else that I can ask about the situation? You know, what are some of the other contributing factors that could have led to this? What are some of the other dominoes in this big chain reaction that could have been a big cause of what ended up happening? And to what extent also do I need to judge myself for it? Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe you could have done something differently. But do you have to feel bad on top of that? Isn't it enough to just say, okay, I'll change my behavior next time and take the lesson? Is it necessary to kind of punish yourself? That's another big part of this, is an element of unnecessary self-punishment, where you feel like you need to feel bad or something. You need to be hurt in some way because of this small mistake. And there can be many root causes of that, but just practicing that literal compassion to yourself to say, hey, okay, I made a mistake. Everybody does. That, I think, is so hard for someone who is constantly self-blaming to let that land. It's almost like you dismiss it, like, okay, yeah, everybody makes mistakes. So what? I made a mistake and I shouldn't have, so therefore I need to suffer for it. No, again, everybody makes mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes tomorrow, the next week, next month. At some point, they're going to act imperfectly. And yeah, there might be some negative repercussions of that. At the end of the day, though, it's just having the intention to do your best, not perfectionism best, but just your best. And if there's something that happens, say sorry, try to make it up, try to not do that same thing again. But going so extreme with it, to judge yourself, to feel so bad that you're unable to get out of bed, or that you're drained emotionally, that's where it just becomes unnecessary and destructive, not productive.
So let's get really intentional about, what is the self-blame costing you? Is there a lot that's costing you? Is there a ripple effect on your family? Is it affecting your work? Is it affecting your mental health? Then, is there anything that the self-blame is giving you? Is it giving you a sense of control? Is it giving you a sense of ownership or responsibility? Is it giving you a sense that things make sense? And then let's start to really question it and just start to put a break into the thought pattern, which is, let me get more information. Let me start with that to break this habit. Because sometimes, again, it's just a thought pattern that you've absorbed non-verbally by seeing other people do it, or maybe it's a thought pattern that formed over time. But either way, a self-blame, if you're feeling a negative emotion that's associated with it, that means there's a really sensitive part under there that's being wounded and not able to process in a much more objective reality. And that's going to affect everybody in your network, including yourself.
Exactly. When you start to get a handle on this, you're going to have so much more energy throughout the day. If you're somebody who's constantly tired or just emotionally empty, you're going to find that when you stop judging yourself so much, and when you let go of this expectation to be perfect all the time, then you really can move through the world in a way that's much more easy. It's much more relaxed. You can actually take a breath and allow yourself to for one, not be upset all the time, not judge yourself all the time, not feel bad all the time. And if you are, making some mistake, you don't have to hide it, even if it's so small. You don't have to pretend like you're perfect and be ashamed of every little mistake. You can talk about your errors. You can talk about how you're not feeling good today. You can talk about the little things that are not going well instead of maintaining this front that everything's perfect. So a lot of this has to do with that sense of hiding, like as if there's something wrong with you on a deep level. There isn't anything wrong with you on a deep level. That's topic for another video. That's a longer issue that we can address. But fundamentally, it's that self-compassion, that self-love, that practice of self-love that allows you to say, yeah, I made a mistake. Yeah, I was wrong about something.
Yes, and be very, very weary of people in your life that are reinforcing the self-blame. If you have people around you that are instilling some of the stuff that's against what Enes is saying here, that they're saying this is your fault, that you are to blame, that you're always doing this, and they're not nurturing, those things can be extraordinarily topic and reinforcing that thought pattern and just causing you to be in a downward spiral in your mental health.
Yeah. So hopefully that's given you some things to think about, some things to start to act on. And just baby step it, little by little, chip away. Look at all the ways that you're self-blaming. Look at all the ways that you're feeling irrational amounts of guilt, all the little mistakes that you feel like you shouldn't be making, even though everybody is. And hopefully over time you can let go of the self-judgment, let go of this perfectionism and this crazy expectation to never make mistakes. And of course, along that, find some self-love, find some self-compassion.
Yeah, it's an absolute necessity for your mental health, for your anxiety, for your depression, and for your family and your network. So beyond that, guys, just know that no matter what you're going through, no matter how bad it is, no matter how long you've been suffering from it for, you're not stuck. You may just need some support. And you can get support here at our YouTube channel. If you have ideas for videos or questions, put them in the comments below. If you want to like and subscribe, we're putting up new content all the time. And furthermore, if you want to reach us, leave a comment below, or you can email us at hello@innersolutions.academy for anything that you need. We're here to help. So for Enes, I'm Jim. We're Inner Solutions, guys. Thank you so much. Remember, good mental health means a good life.